Right, well, we're here today at Ehrenbrook Fisheries, and what I want to concentrate on today is I want to do a little bit of bread dobbing, or just dobbing in general. I'd say this year dobbing's been my number one tactic. I've fished quite a few winter leagues at Tunnel, up at here, Partridge Lakes. Dobbing's definitely been the number one way of catching the most fish during most of the matches, probably due to the cold weather that we've had. But what I want to focus on today is just when you need to be dobbing, why you need to be dobbing, yeah, and what reasons that you need to fish the certain place at the certain time with whatever rigs. We're going to go through all that now. The first reason that I decide to dob a bait would always be because there's no fish feeding in my peg. Yeah, the thing with dobbing is you're not controlling any of your peg and what the fish are feeding. So by dropping a hook bait to likely spots, you're just picking off fish that are congregating in that area that aren't really willing to feed. Yeah, ideally, you'd rather be feeding and catching fish with maggots, pellets, whatever other bait. But say in the winter when those fish aren't happy to feed, by dobbing I can catch a few fish when no one else around me is catching because they fed the pegs. So firstly, what I want to talk about, I'm going to go through my rigs first. This year my rigs have changed somewhat with dobbing. I used to fish with very short rigs, probably 1.5 to 2 foot deep, with a very little line, with very little tiny floats, 4x8s, 4x10s floats. This year I found it so much better to fish a little bit deeper. Definitely the fish have been hanging off them far banks in, that the best depth has been around 3 foot. Fishing 3 foot and 3.5 foot, that's definitely been the best for all of the winter just gone. So because of that, I've moved to a 4x12 float. I find that 4x12s or even a 4x14s works for all my bread dobbing. Yeah, so I find a nice slim float, nice short float as well, because I want to be poking it into all sorts of nooks and crannies in the weeds. But a short wire stem float. Wire stem is very important to increase the stability of my rig when it's in the water. As I said, a 4x12s and a 4x14s as well. So plenty of weight in those floats for the depth that I'm fishing, again, to keep that bread still. So my shotting with these rigs, it's the same no matter what. I'm fishing with 3 number 12s down my line. So I tend to find that I use styles or stots for all my bread fishing because I can move them so much easier on my line. I find I'm moving my shots up and down all the time to create a different fall, but we'll come into that in a minute. So the bulk of my shot goes directly under my float. So there's no use for any of that shot down the line because it'll hinder the fall of the bread. So by having it all under my float, again, with the wire stem, it increases the stability of my float and keeps it right where I want it to be. If I've got a piece of bread that's moving left or right, it's really unnatural. So I want to be able to keep that float right in the gaps where I put it, and hopefully I'll be able to catch a fish in that way. So by having my rig like that, it improves to keep it where I want it to be. The next element of my rig that I found massively important this year is by having a great big length of line between my float and my pole. I'd like a minimum, normally 2.5 to 3 foot at least. It's definitely getting me more bites because I'm being able to keep that pole right away from the float. In the clear water conditions where the fish are against the far bank, I'm being able to keep my pole out of the way, and it's definitely been getting me more bites. I feel that it does lead to a few more missed bites because I've got that longer length of line, but I definitely get a much higher percentage of bites and I catch more fish because of it. So I'm happy to stick with it for now. What I do to try and eliminate the missed bites is I'll always fish a back shot though. So I have a back shot normally probably around a foot away from the float, and that causes this length of line between my pole and my back shot to remain tight when I'm holding my pole. So at least that way I'm still responding to a bite quickly because this length of line doesn't have to be brought up on the strike. So I'm only really picking that bit of line up. It definitely helps me to get back onto the fish quicker and catch a few more. So the last element of my rig that I feel it's really, really important is the type of hook that I use. I've played with all sorts of hooks in the past, and I definitely feel that the lighter hook you can possibly use in the situation with the snags that you're fishing against, the better. Because I need it to be very, very natural with that fall of the bread. So the heavier my hook, the worse it'll make my bread look, the quicker it'll fall, and it'll make it a little bit less chance of the fish seeing it as it goes down. So I've settled on, by using a Gamakatsu wide gate maggot, that is my ideal bread hook. That I use that in conjunction with a 7 or a 9mm punch, and it completely unhinders the fall of the punch through the water. Obviously with my shotting, with only having 3 number 12s down, there's very little shot to pull the bread down actually, so my whole rig falls really, really slowly through the water. Right, that's pretty much rig done. Obviously, other than that, the only other element of my rig I will definitely say has been important, but this is through all my rigs this year, has been by fishing a minimum of 0.15 mainline. I believe this makes my rig so much more durable, but it makes my rig straighter as well. It keeps my rig, because it's a little bit more dense, the line, it keeps my rig nice and straight in the water. It also adds a little bit more resistance to the rig as it's falling down through the water and makes my bread sink a little bit slower. But definitely 0.15 mainline to finally an 0.10 hook length. I feel I can land pretty much anything on 0.10. I can still give them a little bit of stick if I need to, and I believe it gets me more bites. Right, well, the second element I want to talk about is my bait. Obviously, the number one bait by far for dobbing is definitely the bread, which it's what I prefer myself. It's always my go-to bait. But that doesn't mean you won't catch anything else. It's always worth trying a few maggots, a bit of corn skins, anything you want. You can dob any bait you want just to see if the fish want that on a day. But for me, bread's the only one I want to use. If I'm going to use my bread, again, Orange Warburton's the only bread it's worth using. Anything else swells up too much. This just seems to be perfect, and it compresses into a lovely, lovely little disc that I can get 2 or 3 goes on. I can miss a couple of bites and keep my bread on, so it keeps me fishing for a little bit longer. But what I do just as a little trick, just to make it a little bit more tacky, if you like, is add a little bit of spray to it. I'm not a big fan of flavours and things like that. I've never been one to feel that a fish will eat something because it's strawberry flavour or whatever. But I do believe in using additives to perform the way your bait works, if you like. So what I use, by using a little bit of Scopex spray and just spraying my bread a couple of times, I'm not actually covering my bread in the spray, I'm just coating it slightly. Because it's such a sugary liquid, it makes my bread really, really sticky, and it stops my bread from drying out in the sun. So by making my bread really sticky, when I compress it, it'll hold in that nice tight disc for maybe 2 or 3 minutes longer, and again prolongs my bread fishing, keeps me out there fishing for a little bit longer, and lets me come back with a fish every time. So the punches that I'm going to use, as I said, I use 2 punches, both of them are nice simple. One's a 9mm, one's a 7mm. I've never found it any reason to use any other punches. My go-to is my 7mm, because I believe this works lovely, and it's more palatable to both F1s and carp, which is normally what I'm fishing for at the venues I go to. So I can always swap to the 9mm if I need to, if I feel that the fish are too small, or if I'm having roach problems. But with the roach, also saying that, by adding the Scopex, I'm a big believer in that roach hates Scopex. So by adding that to my bread, it's also a little, probably a personal thing more than anything, that I feel that hopefully a few roach keep away from it because I've used it. Right, it's probably the most important thing that I want to concentrate on when I'm dobbing, is when during my match is the best time to actually fish into those places where the fish aren't feeding. It's become sort of a like the thing to do, that everyone starts the match with a bit of bread and dobbing across to the far bank. I definitely think, while that can work if you're on a right pile of fish, I definitely think what you need to start your match by doing is feeding one area of your peg. So by feeding in an area of your peg, you get a much better idea of how the fish are responding on the day. Because like I said before, if the fish are feeding, you need to catch them by feeding. You're going to control your peg so much better, and you're going to catch a lot more fish by creating a bit of competition. So what I'd rather do, I'd use my bread after I've caught a few fish. If I need to, of course, if they're going to feed all day, I'll catch a load by feeding. But I definitely use dobbing as a tactic to use in the middle of the match when there's a lull, when the fish tend to move to the sheltered areas where they want to just get out of our way. And I want to go across there with just a single hook bait and pick a few fish off before they come back onto my lines when I can feed and catch them again. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to have a little fish now, and what I want to explain is how I actually fish my peg when I'm dobbing. I want to assume that I've fished and caught a few short. What I'm going to move on to now is where I'm going to dob and how I'm going to move about to keep the fish within my area. The last thing I want to do is start on one line and then keep moving right the way across my peg and scare the fish completely out my area. What I want to do instead is I want to catch a few in one place, a few in another, and then end up with a big concentrated ball of fish in the middle that I can keep picking fish off by resting certain lines, and I can prolong my catching spell for a lot longer. So say we're going to have a little go down there and see what happens now. Get me rig, what we're going to do, I'm going to start always my go-to, my 7mm punch. I just punch him out and I give it a right good compression on top of the punch. And then I stick him on and I compress it again once some hook. I give it a big squeeze. Always make sure my hook point's sticking out. So obviously I can get a bite really quickly, so I want to see what's going on straight away. But now I've got a lovely compressed bit of bread that's going to be quite durable for a while. Obviously it's quite sticky with the Scopex, so it's going to stay on the hook for a good 3, 4, 5 minutes, which hopefully, as long as a few fish are willing, will give me time to come back with a fish. And what is quite important with my bread is that I put my rigging in the correct way. The last thing I can do is I can't put it all down in a heap. If I put it all in a heap, because I've got no shot or very little shot down my rig, it could easily tangle. So instead I have to put it in a nice long line all the way through the water. I'm just going to sink that back shot to begin with. Yeah, by laying my rig in a nice long line, it makes my rig sink nice and slow because of that thick line and the nice light floaty bit of bread on the hook. It's going to sink really slow and really naturally. And hopefully that'll give the fish a good 10 to 12 seconds for it to see that bread falling, come along and nail it. You definitely find with bread that all your bites come within I'd say probably 30 seconds of your float settling. If I haven't had a bite within 30, maybe 40 seconds at the most, then I'll just lift my bread, lay it in again. I'll do that 2 or 3 times in the same spot, and then I'll move along somewhere else and try and find a little gang of fish somewhere. So to begin with, I'm just going to start off around this bridge, try and catch a couple of F1s there, then move over to the stick-ups, then move past the big bed of stick-ups, and then slowly end up with a great big gang of fish right in the middle with a bit of luck. So no other bite. Again, just lift my bread, lay my rig in a great big long line, and it's sinking right in line for all them fish to see it. See it going down nice. It takes it ever so long for that float to settle, because you're waiting for the weight of the bread to show up on your bristle, if you like. So give it a little tweak. Yeah, the bread takes a long time to settle, so as soon as that shows up on my bristle, as it has done now, I know that my rig's straight. So I'll give that a couple of, probably 10 seconds, and then I'll lift it out and I'll put it in again. Give it one more chance in this area, and then I'll move to another. Better. So I've just got to remember at all times to support the weight of that back shot. So my back shot's quite close to my float. I've got it around a foot away, so if I actually dip my pole too low, it'll start sinking my float. So just by holding my float up, it allows that float to pop up a little bit, and I know that I'm keeping a tight line at all times between my back shot and my pole, but it's helping to keep my float nice and still and right where I want it to be. So I've had no bites by that bridge, so I'm just going to wiggle him up, try not to get caught in the weeds. Just going to wiggle him up and put him just onto that first little bed of rushes there and see. So what I'm not seeing any rushes or any of the weeds knocking about yet. That's a sure sign of the areas I need to target. It gives you a clue where the fish are ganged up generally in these weeds. I definitely feel that there's certain weed beds that the fish like to be in and others where they don't like to be. So you tend to have to keep looking for the little signs that tell you where the fish are. So it'll give you a much quicker idea of where you need to be spending your time. So as I said before, I've got this set at probably nearly 3 foot, just under 3 foot I've got it set at the moment. The water there is around 4 foot. So I'm quite happy to fish around a foot off the bottom as my starting depth. As I said, this winter 3 foot has been by far the best depth to dob fish at. I find that I catch more of both types of species in it, carp and F1s. Oh, there's a little bite then. So as I was saying, I find I fish more of both types of species by fishing at 3 foot than if I fish at a foot or even 2 foot. I find that I catch more carp or less F1s at one depth. I'd say by fishing like this, I'm fishing right the way through the water. And I catch all sorts. It doesn't feel quite right, this. Either a big lad or... I don't know what I think it's just wrapped round him. Pull in a bit. Definitely starting to wake up a little bit now after the winter. You having to beef up on the elastics a little bit. But he's the ideal size of fish that I'm looking to catch by dobbing. An F1 of nearly £2 probably. So if I can catch a number of them in the period where the fish aren't feeding, if I can catch 20 of them, then it's a massive boost to my weight at the end of the match. And again, by doing this, hopefully I've got the chance of catching a few really big bonus fish as well that aren't likely to feed at this time of the year. Right, I'm just gonna, now I've caught one in that little spot. That's normally a good sign of where to concentrate on for a while. I'll try and catch as many fish as I possibly can from my first spot. I don't believe in resting it until I need to rest it. I've had days where you catch one fish from each spot, and I've also had days where you catch £100 from one spot. So it's always worth trying to catch as many as you can. Once you find that first little area that's going to produce you a few bites, So just concentrate on it, catch whatever you can as quickly as you can almost, just to begin with. So I've got no danger fishing that area where I am now of spooking the shoaler fish, if you like, and completely losing them out my peg. Because I'm right in that corner there, the fish are only going to move to the weed beds to my left, and I'm not going to completely lose them to the angler to my right or anything like that. Oh, yeah. Ooh, they're not nailing it, they're dead shy, which is quite strange for a bread bite. I'd normally expect them to be really positive. Another good size F1. See that bread, that Scopex does not make that bread really stay on. So until I started using it, I never had things like that. My bread staying on while I caught the fish. Right, it's gone a little bit quiet in that corner now. It took me 5 minutes to get that bite then. So instead of just moving along slightly, I'm going to go to the maximum of peg. I'm going to go, or not the maximum, I'm going to go 14 metres up towards that corner over there. Because I've seen a few fish knocking about in the weeds. So I'm just going to try and catch them at that top end of my peg. So hopefully chase them into the middle. So I just have to be careful that I'm not putting it on top of any underwater snags, but my bristle will tell me whether my bread's settled or not. So with dobbing, there's definitely no areas that aren't worth trying, but it's always favourable to be dobbing it towards a feature. Definitely, you're looking at places that fish are going to be held up and not wanting to feed. So open water is very, very hit or miss to do it in. So I'd always want to do it to a reed bed, a bush, a next peg. A pallet on the next peg can often be a really good feature that can hold a few fish if you've got enough depth. So, but concentrating on areas like this that have got a lot of cover for the fish. That's definitely the best. That was a brilliant bite then, and flipping missed it. That was a real positive bite then. Still, I'm always holding my pole very high off the water as well. So what I was talking about before, about keeping that pole right out the way so the fish can't see it, but I've still got that back shot to maintain that it's all tight and my rig's kept still. It surprised me that we've not had another indication in that. Oh, we winged that one then. Another F1, but that's a really good sign to be catching them in two different areas of my peg. It's the right sort of things are happening, what I wanted to. I've caught a few there and I've caught a few at the furthest point. They're definitely going to end up in between the two pegs that I'm fishing now. Ooh. There, don't he? See that then? Come on. Eat it. Still not a big boy though. Get out. Ba-ding. I don't think he's a big boy, is it? No. Foot one. Well, it might be. Yes. That's a nice bonus one. Lovely, pretty one. My first proper carp of the day, that. So the bread's always very susceptible to catching proper fish, commons and mirrors, when they're not going to get caught on anything else pretty much. So luckily a few of them are always willing to eat the bread. He's a better one, he's probably what? Probably £4. I say it's going really well. If it were a match, I'd be really happy now with the way it's gone. I've probably caught 20, £30 dobbing, and I've still not gone to where I feel that my best area is going to be. What I'm going to do, I'm going to slowly move right into this middle area now. I've just caught one, I've caught half a dozen at the furthest point. I'm going to move in now and catch the bulk of my fish before I start feeding and catch a few short. So let's see how this goes. Oh, a little bugget. Hey, so the one that's just spooked. Spooked a great big lad then. I think he's fouled up. I think he's just wrapped around him. Yes, he's just. He's in the mouth. Right, so I've probably been. Probably fished. We had a dob now for about 90 minutes, and I've ended up with 15 of these fish and one, probably about £4. So it's got me nearly £35, which I made up with in the space of 90 odd minutes. As I say, it's something to do during that middle part when there's no way I would have caught that feeding. The fish naturally aren't feeding on any bait that I'm feeding. So by dobbing, I've caught that extra addition to my net. So hopefully I've gone through dobbing in a little bit more depth than I've been through before, and hopefully you can catch a few by doing it.